Morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, all. Good morning. Okay. Unfortunately, my settings, I don't know what I have done. I cannot see your comments. Good morning, everybody. I hope all of you are fine. Let's start with a very big smile. Good morning, each and every one of you. As I told you, I'm unable to reply to you personally because I cannot see the comments. So if you have to say something, please WhatsApp me and I will answer. Okay. Now, today we are talking about one more important aspect in international business, that is international production and operations management. International production and operations management. Now, you see, when a multinational company leaves its own home country, see, if it's an, say, suppose there is a multinational, Indian multinational, we call India its home country. And when it goes to, excuse me, when it goes to some other country, we call it that we call that country the country of operations. All right. So imagine a multinational company wants to enter into a new country of operations. Then it has certain decisions to make as regards international production and operations management. Now, when we talk about production and operations, we are talking about manufacturing and delivery of goods and services. Operations management means services, and production and production means actual tangible goods. So they will be asking questions like, for example, their decisions will be: should we manufacture in our home country and send it to the country of new country of operations? See, what happens is if they manufacture the goods in their own country and then send to the country of operations, suppose the goods are very good and with good quality goods and they are priced reasonably, the people in the new country will start buying the products. That time, what happens is the goods produced by that country or indigenously, like the people in that country, will face competition. All right, sometimes due to WTO and the most favored nation and all these kind of conditions, people are forced to open their markets, or maybe like World Bank and IMF have given loan on the condition that they open their borders to foreign investors and foreign manufacturers of goods. So it is this is not at all bad to have international business. But then the indigenous production, suppose it is not up to the mark, suppose it is the raw material is costly or labor is costly, then the cost of production of the indigenous goods of production becomes heavier and costlier than the foreign goods. So people will say the foreign goods are, better quality and cheaper. Why don't I buy this? So that time what happens? Indigenous manufacturers will approach the government for help. They say you have to do something, and then the government will put tariff barriers. Tariff barriers means barriers where you have to pay financial barriers. Okay, like octroi, near the borders, some kind of duty, ad valorem. That ad valorem means on the value of the goods, there will be some this thing duty. So all these things will come on the on the foreign goods. So when these duties are added, they have to be added to the cost of production or the cost of distribution and selling. Okay, apart from the actual cost of production, cost of distribution of, and selling also attaches to the cost of sales. So the sales price minus the cost of sales will give you the profit. When the cost of sales is enhanced due to or become increased due to all these octroi duties and other duties, what happens is profit, the cost of sale, the sales price cannot increase because it has to be competitive, and the profit will decrease. Or if you want high profit, then you must make the sales price more. And if the sales price is more, then they'll say, after all, it is foreign goods and the sales price is more, who will buy? Unless some loyalists are there, so there will be no sales. So these are the issues. So one more thing is non-tariff barriers. Say when the government of a country finds that foreign manufacturers' goods are preferred over the indigenous goods, then they'll start not only tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers. Non-tariff barriers are like quotas. You cannot import more than so much. You cannot import into a country. There will be import quotas. So the person who is exporting will have to go within that quota. It won't be the only person, no. Suppose there are 10 people exporting to that country from different countries. Each country will be given some quota. So that quota applies to that country. So your government will say you can export to such and such a country only so much. So there will be import quotas. Then there will be protectionist laws. Protectionist laws like they'll say you have suppose this was what happened with Honda. See, when Honda went to US, they really, I may have told you this example before, I'd like to repeat it. When they went to US, they were worried that US will put protectionist non-tariff barriers on the Honda car. Suppose Honda was to manufacture the car in Japan in parts and carry it on ships to America. It is called CKD condition, completely knocked down condition. You take the car in the CKD condition to the United States, and then you assemble the car there and sell it there. Then what will happen is, for entry you will have to give in all the car parts on the value of the car parts, sometimes ad valorem duty, something like this. The duties will fall on the car, so that when the car parts finally reach America and get assembled, they become much more expensive than the American cars. So what Honda did is it started manufacturing in Cincinnati, or I think Cincinnati, in the US. Okay, they established a factory in the US. Now you will understand by what I've been telling, the dilemma that a foreign manufacturer or a foreign MNC faces when he goes into a country of operations. The idea is, should I manufacture in my country and export it here and just treat it as exporting, or should I become a multinational by establishing my factories in the country? Okay, suppose they establish a factory in the country, it becomes foreign direct investment. Suppose they have to leave the country due to some new laws, sometimes some dictators will take over and they'll say, I don't want you, they'll want some other company in the country. I don't want you, you're not my ally, and all that. Then the factory that they have built and all the money they have sunk into the infrastructure will be a waste. Whereas, as I told you, foreign direct investment, CFGF. Huh? Last time I could not remember, and then I think one of you, yes, our Nepali student, oh, I'm forgetting your name, man, Shilpi, yeah. So CFGF, okay, gross fixed capital, okay. So that CFGF increases when of a country increases when there is foreign direct investment. Now let's talk about whether, see, Hyundai, for example, has established factories in Chennai. I think Hyundai, yeah, has established in Chennai, around Chennai, so that you have cars manufactured in India to sell in India and to export to other countries also. So this is one more feature. See, the first feature is you want to sell in India, so you come and establish a factory in India. Example is Coca-Cola. All right. The Coca-Cola that is manufactured in India is sold in India. First kind of model. The second model is you establish a factory in India to sell in India as well as to sell the what is manufactured in India in foreign countries. That time India has become a manufacturing hub mainly because we have a lot of educated laborers. Most 99% of our people speak English, which everybody in the world understands. English is a universal language, so when many of us Indians understand English, it becomes easier for a foreigner to deal with it. Not that all foreigners speak English, but generally it's a universal language. Okay, it doesn't mean that all foreigners speak English. We Indians speak very good English actually. Indians and South Asians, no, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. We are most of our people are capable of speaking in the international language. Okay, now that is why that communication becomes easy, and there are a lot of educated Indians in our country. That is the second thing. You whatever you want engineers, you want doctors, you want lawyers, you want production specialists. We have lot of specialists and educated, technically educated Indians also. That is one thing why they establish factories in India. And the third thing is labor. Labor cost is much cheaper than other countries. I saw a chart once for a particular job for 1 hour, for one particular job for 1 hour, a German was paid $28 per hour. $28 per hour. I went down on the chart and saw Indian was paid only 28 cents. Okay, as compared to the German, a German has is paid $28 for a particular job for 1 hour. The same job an Indian is paid for per hour only 28 cents. So you can understand the difference in the labor rates. Now, one more thing I wanted to tell you. See, I think last time I told you about Kia Motors. Okay, Kia Motors is in India, definitely. When Kia Motors also went to Slovakia. Czechoslovakia was a country which divided into two, Slovakia and the Czech Republic, after Glasnost. Glasnost is the disintegration of the USSR into different small countries. Now, what happened with the when the USSR broke up into Russia and other countries, many countries who were depending on Russia and followed their socialism or communist kind of pattern of administration, they stopped using it because Russia used to financially support them. I also told you about Cuba. See what happened in Cuba. Cuba was essentially backed by USSR. Cuba, as when I was in school and all, we learned one thing that many about Cuba. The important thing we learned was it was called the sugar bowl of the world. So what happened in the 1950s is the in Cuba the factories were owned by Americans. The processing factories were owned by Americans, and the farms and the fields where the sugarcane was grown was owned by the Cubans. So the Cubans were unhappy with the rates and with the deal they got by for from the Americans for buying the sugarcane. So they went and they had a rebellion where Fidel Castro was the main person. His brother Raul Castro, and you have this che Guevara, which many of you see in shirts. This one rebel supposed to be the biggest most popular rebel in the world. So Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, and Raul Castro, 29 men, they say, routed the American army from. They had to go away from Cuba, mainly because Cuba it rains heavily and there's fields they were not very familiar, etc., etc. There was a lot of strategies involved, and Americans were left Cuba for good. Then how did Cuba survive all these years? Cuba grows a lot of sugar. Okay, the manufactures a lot of sugar. This sugar was bought by the USSR for exorbitant prices, more prices than what was necessary. So what happened is Cuba could survive because it's a small island. is like a banana republic. What do you mean by banana republic? A banana republic is someone who grows only agricultural produce and lives on the agricultural produce. Okay, they survive on the agricultural produce. So that is why many countries which survive on only literally bananas and maybe fruits and sugarcane and rice and all, they're called banana republics, not to make fun of them but to identify them as agrarian countries, okay, agrarian economies. So what happened in Cuba is they don't have anything else except agriculture, and this sugar was bought at exorbitant rates by the USSR, so their economy could survive very well. But when in 1989